40 Chinese missiles roared across the Pacific, hurtling towards Guam like a storm. Radar systems immediately switched immediately to red alert. Over 3 dozen interceptor missiles launched simultaneously, creating a blazing skyfire meeting fire, metal clashing with metal. More than 90% of the warheads were diverted, but a few still broke through, causing a series of explosions that rocked Andersen Air Force Base. Hangars cracked open, logistics depots ignited, and hundreds of millions of dollars in equipment were damaged. No lives were lost, but America understood the next strike wouldn't be so lenient. Just 36 hours later, the Pentagon retaliated. From the ocean floor to the stratosphere, a synchronized network of lethal force was unleashed. B-2s dropped GBU-57 bunker busters. Aircraft carriers launched Tomahawk Block 5s, and F-35s carrying JSSMs streaked through the Asian night sky. And somewhere in the tropical mist, American combat systems began rewriting the rules of engagement. Each retaliatory strike seemed programmed not just to destroy infrastructure, but to crush the will to resist. But it was the hypersonic missiles that shook Guam and forced America to retaliate. If you want to know what happens next, hit follow immediately, because the rest won't be gentle. This is high-tech warfare, with ton-heavy bombs, stealth fighters, and retaliatory strikes designed to wipe out every coordinate. Missile rain over the Pacific. 10:32 in the morning. On July 3, 2025, Andersen Air Force Base, Guam. The sky over Guam was unusually clear, but the radar screens at the early warning center had turned red. Along the 20th parallel, hypersonic signals appeared simultaneously from 4 different directions: Zhejiang, Fujian, Guangdong, and Hainan Island. All were headed towards the western Pacific. 40 Chinese DF-27B ballistic missiles had been launched. Each carried 3 independently targetable re-entry vehicles, MIRVs, flying at Mach 9, designed to pierce through all layers of defense using system overload tactics. Less than 8 seconds after the first signal was detected, the Integrated Air Defense System in Guam automatically activated. THAAD, Patriot PAC-3 MSE, and ground-to-air-to-sea sensor modules simultaneously confirmed the attack signals. A chain of combat data was transmitted to each air defense launcher in just 1.6 seconds. 36 interceptor missiles were launched from 9 positions around the island. Each flew along intersecting trajectories, targeting the incoming warheads. At an altitude of over 30,000 feet, the sky over Guam glowed with bright white flashes, each mid-air collision sending shockwaves through the air that could be felt on the ground. 70 warheads were completely intercepted. The remaining 50 warheads penetrated the final layer of defense, but their speed and angle of descent had been altered by electromagnetic interference and thermal feedback. The emergency response system at Andersen AFB and Apra Harbor moved all personnel to shelters in just 93 seconds. 10:33 in the morning. Impacts occurred. 1 warhead landed near a KC-135 maintenance hangar, causing an explosion that spread to the logistics parts depot. 3 military trucks were severely damaged, but all personnel had been evacuated before the explosion. 2 other warheads struck an old technical area on the western edge of Andersen, which was no longer used for operational flight purposes. Concrete structures partially collapsed, and fire spread to an auxiliary electrical infrastructure workshop. Military firefighters brought the situation under control after 6 minutes. Another missile headed towards Apra Harbor's pier, detonating on a container staging area. The shockwave toppled 2 cranes and destroyed a 120-meter section of logistics rail. However, the docked submarine had been pulled out of position 3 minutes earlier, thanks to early warnings from the Satellite Communication Coordination Center. In the central area of Andersen, 7 warheads landed in an open field south of the runway. The concrete of the taxiway was shattered, and the ground was scorched by jet heat. A B-2 Spirit undergoing maintenance inside a hardened hangar sustained minor nose damage from the blast pressure, but its stealth skin remained structurally intact. Out of the 50 warheads that got through, only 9 hit strategically valuable areas. The rest landed in empty controlled zones, areas that had been constructed according to a ballistic absorption model. All personnel on the island were evacuated according to protocol, with only 12 individuals sustaining minor injuries from debris and air pressure, all of whom were stabilized at the Air Force Medical Center. A smoke plume nearly 2,000 meters high rose from the reserve fuel depot, obscuring the sky northwest of Guam. But there was no collapse, no disruption to the command system, and most importantly, no end. 10:47 in the morning. Optical signals from WGS-11 satellites confirmed all heat signatures came from mobile launchers of the PLA rocket force. Identified locations included a forest camouflaged with radar netting in Fujian, a rocky mountainside near Sanya-Hainan, and 2 mobile positions in the Guangdong Plains, all consistent with intelligence maps from the previous year. At the National Military Command Center, the screen turned blue. No more red alert. An electronic voice announced, "Large-scale attack concluded. Response forces remain on standby." A senior officer stood up, looking directly at the electronic map on the wall. Below the red icon marked DF-27 launch zones. Another icon had been unlocked, a golden yellow symbol bearing 3 short letters, IRS. The U.S. counteroffensive had been anticipated, and now was the time for Iron Storm to cut through the clouds and cross the sea. Supercarriers can't stand still. 11:17 at night on July 4th, 2025, Sulu Sea, Southeast Philippines. The aircraft carrier USS Ronald Reagan glided smoothly, like a sleeping floating city. But below deck, hundreds of watch officers still wore communication headsets, their eyes glued to navigation screens. The air was as tense as the water before a storm. A STRATCOM-level encrypted signal was decoded in less than 0.8 seconds. The indicator screen inside the combat center lit up with the command, IRS Alpha active, launch on green. Operation Iron Storm officially commenced. Immediately, 96 VLS vertical launch tubes on the USS Ronald Reagan and 3 escort cruisers began loading. Each tube contained a Tomahawk Block 5 cruise missile, with a range of over 1,600 km, terrain-following guidance, integrated multi-layered routing intelligence, and a nearly 500 km penetrating warhead. This complex was likened to radar-blind swords, striking directly into the enemy's heart before defenses could react. Beneath the sea, 2 Virginia-class submarines, one hidden near the Hainan coast, the other approaching from the Bashi Channel, had locked coordinates and were on standby for launch. Target signals were shared across the JADC-2 combat network, connecting satellites, radars, UAVs, fleet command, and bombers in a unified coordination space with virtually no delay. On Guam, 3 B-2 Spirits had taken off from Anderson's second runway just hours earlier, after mid-air refueling via KC-46A over the eastern Philippines. They flew silently westward, carrying GBU-57A-B bunker buster bombs, the only weapons capable of drilling through meters of reinforced concrete to destroy underground missile command centers. In the dark of the horizon, 18 F-35Cs from the USS Ronald Reagan launched from the flight deck, accelerating with each passing second. Each carried 2 AGM-158B JSSM-ER stealth missiles with a 450 kW warhead and a 925 km range, designed to destroy high-value targets such as weapons depots, control centers, and fighter jet hangars. Not far from them, 4 EA-18G Growlers flew in an arc, conducting electronic jamming missions. High-intensity radio waves were continuously emitted, sweeping across the coastal area of Fujian, where the HQ-9B air defense system was on standby. Each jamming pulse was adjusted in real time, simulating dozens of phantom targets, causing PLA radars to fall into synchronized chaos. At the highest altitude, an RQ-180 drone, a new, never-before publicly revealed stealth reconnaissance model, silently flew at over 70,000 feet, collecting enemy radar signals and locating key targets such as the DF-27B command center in Longmen, radar stations in Fuzhou, and mobile reloading facilities on Hainan Island. All were moving in a symphony, preparing to end with hot steel and fire. 12:02 in the morning on July 5th, the Operational Control Center in Hawaii, which monitored all information flow, confirmed the final launch order. An electronic button was pressed. The words "Strike Confirmed" appeared almost simultaneously on every device from submarine radar underwater to B-2 control compartments. America's modern counteroffensive had begun. Tomahawks launched simultaneously from the Sulu Sea, their warheads separating after passing the Paracel Islands. In the air, F-35Cs approached launch range to their targets, JASSM-ER missiles skimming meters above the sea, following the mountainous terrain of China's coast, Submarines simultaneously released their ordnance from underwater, the missiles surfacing a few meters above the water before turning and joining the main attack stream. From a distance of over 100 kilometers, the B-2 activated its targeting radar. In the bomb bay, GBU-57s were locked into place. When RQ-180 signals confirmed the target at Longmen was clear, the pilot ordered weapons away. A second later, the 13,600 kiloliter bomb was released from 50,000 feet, free-falling at destructive speed, aiming directly at China's missile base. At a different altitude, RQ-4 Global Hawk cameras recorded all movements from above. On the ground, infrared light clusters reflected through the haze, clearly showing radar domes and missile fuel pipelines glowing orange-red. All that remained was a countdown in seconds. Operation Iron Storm had passed the preparation phase. China's sky was about to endure a retaliation designed not just to destroy, but to send a message. Guam had survived. Now was the time for America to prove why the Pacific had never belonged to anyone else. The attack that staggered China. 2:48 in the morning, on July 5th, 2025, Chinese coastal airspace from Guangdong to Zhejiang. The storm from the west brought no clouds, but something else: hypersonic metal, compound explosives, electronic guidance signals, and high-altitude jamming pulses. Over Guangdong province, a thin but brilliant red beam of light tore through the darkness. The first GBU-57A-B from a B-2 Spirit struck the Longmen missile base, once described in a DIA report as the living command node of southern China's DF-27B units. The bomb plunged at nearly 3,000 km/h, penetrating hard earth, then 3 layers of reinforced concrete. Seconds later, the ground heaved as if punched from within. A massive fireball erupted from the earth, sending red dust and steel fragments flying over 200 meters high. The shockwave spread within a radius of nearly 600 meters, snapping antenna arrays and toppling the secondary command tower on the edge of the base. At the same time, 48 Tomahawk Block FIA struck the western side of Hainan Island, the Sanya Naval Port area. A mobile missile launcher located near the auxiliary pier took a direct hit. Fire erupted from the liquid missile fuel storage, turning a section of the coastline into a sea of flames. A fire spread along the ammunition lead-in fence, detonating primary fuel canisters in a chain reaction. 620 km away, near Fuzhou, HQ-9B radars received decoy signals from EA-18G Growler aircraft. Controllers drew dozens of false targets on their screens as air defense missiles opened fire. F-35C JSSM ERs were already approaching the airspace. 2 JSSMs slammed into a J-20 aircraft hangar, where 5 fifth-generation fighters were being rearmed. An explosion blew open the roof, turning the hangar into a glowing orb that lasted nearly 12 seconds. Fire swept across the concrete apron, scattering unopened ammunition crates. Video footage from civilians in the suburbs showed the eastern sky of the city glowing red like an inverted sunset. Northeast, near Ningbo, Tomahawk struck the ground communication coordination area of the Coastal Defense Radar Cluster. The operations building was ripped in half, transmission cables burning into long streaks of blue light. A high-altitude transmission station snapped in half, as if broken by the wind. Within 11 minutes, the entire eastern radar cluster fell into a state of tactical blindness. In the air, RQ-180 drones continued transmitting infrared images and synthesized radar data to command centers in Hawaii, Virginia, and the USS Ronald Reagan's command deck. The JDC-2 system automatically suggested the next targets based on geographical shock effects and spreading thermal energy. Secondary target paths were relayed to B-2's submarines and F-35C complexes that still had weapons. South of Hainan Island, a secondary explosion at a relay station caused a coastal landslide, burying heavy weapons containers and mobile radar trucks. Fire spread to the pine forest along the coast. The pine trees glowed red like torches, then uprooted and fell in rows. Chinese defenses responded with several surface-to-air missile launches from the HQ-9 cluster in Xiamen, but the projectiles flew off course or detonated prematurely in midair. Post-battle assessment data from the U.S. Air Force recorded over 70% of air defense systems were temporarily blinded for 15 to 18 minutes, enough for the entire main attack to conclude as planned. 3:11 in the morning, WGS-11 satellites completed their second sweep. Combined data showed 4 DF-27 missile command centers destroyed. 2 J-20 hangars in Fuzhou and Hainan completely damaged. Over 60% of strategic coastal radar complexes neutralized. Estimated material losses exceeding 4.1 billion. Surveillance drones transmitted images, a convoy of logistics vehicles hauling charred equipment out of the Longmen area. White smoke from underground fire suppression systems appeared at the Sanya Pier, interspersed with vertical black smoke plumes from destroyed towers. The South China Sea had never been quiet, but tonight, the water was calm because coastal radars were no longer operational. The PLA forces issued no tactical directives for nearly an hour after the strike. On Guam, soldiers on the Anderson runway received the first operational update via the internal communication network. Initial results targets hit with 93.7% of probability. All missions returned safely. Combat network remained intact. The answer to the DF-27B attack had been written with Tomahawks, JSSMs, and GBUs, each playing a role, but speaking the same language, precise, swift, unwavering. The Pacific glowed brightly in the night, and from Longmen to Sanya, every offensive system that had once threatened Guam was burned to ashes. The response of the true power holder. The morning of July 6, 2025, the Pentagon, Beijing, the Pacific. In the deepest basement of the U.S. Department of Defense, in the Global Strategic Operations Room, new maps had replaced early warning schematics. On the large screen at the east of the room, red-marked areas gradually faded. China's coastal radars had stopped transmitting signals over 6 hours earlier. On Guam, the black smoke plume that had risen on the 5th was now just a thin wisp, dissolving into the morning humidity. Engineer units were repairing the auxiliary runway south of Anderson. KC-135 aircraft had returned to refueling duties, and B-2s were towed back to hangars for technical inspection. The island's entire combat system had been restored to readiness. No one in Washington asked if China intended to retaliate. The more pertinent question was, did they even have the capability to launch another strike? In Beijing, state media outlets remained silent. On the Central Military Commission's internal maps, the Longmen, Sanya, Fuzhou, and Ningbo regions were marked with a light red flame icon. A group of staff officers reported to the command system over 70% of the DF-27B missile infrastructure in the east had been decommissioned within 24 hours. A leaked analysis from a Western intelligence agency stated the logistics, communication radar, and reloading equipment at these sites would require at least 5 to 7 years to restore simultaneous deployment capabilities. In the meantime, the remaining missile units would have to retreat deeper inland, outside the control of the Western Pacific. The market effect was short-lived, but impactful enough to create a stir. China's industrial index fell 4.8% in 48 hours. Many shipping companies rerouted their maritime routes. But by noon on July 8th, the Singaporean-flagged container ship with hull number KRN 988 had returned to its course through the Luzon Strait, escorted at depth by a Virginia-class submarine. In Canberra, the Australian Parliament convened an emergency session, introducing the Indo-Pacific Strategic Realignment Bill for discussion, which expanded operational rights for U.S. forces in Darwin. The Philippines officially activated Article 4 of its Mutual Defense Treaty with the U.S., allowing P-8 Poseidon surveillance aircraft to operate continuously in Palawan airspace. In South Korea, ground radar units were switched to real-time coordination with the 7th Fleet for the first time since 2017. A strategic message had spread. America's response capability didn't just exist on maps. It was present, precise, ready, and required no prior warning. 11:30 in the morning, Washington time. On the south steps of the Pentagon, the Secretary of Defense stood before dozens of global television cameras. Behind him, the national flag billowed, and 2 Marine Corps officers in dress uniforms stood at attention. His speech began with 9 words. Guam stood firm, and the world witnessed. In the midday light, he looked directly into the camera. America's strength is not in its ability to avoid conflict, but in how we ensure the world understands anyone who touches American people, American territory, American interests, will receive a faster answer than any signal they've ever transmitted. He gestured towards the East Asia map behind him. Everything that once threatened Guam has disappeared from radar, and that is the only lesson the United States needs to send. On social media, millions of accounts from Honolulu to San Diego posted the same icon, a map of Guam, with the words, "We returned fire," accompanied by hashtags #IronStorm, #Avengers of Guam. On a coastal road near Tumon, residents erected a handwritten wooden sign, "No storm is strong enough to sink the Eagle." Guam held firm, and from Longmen to Sanya, from Fuzhou to Ningbo, all that was once assembled to threaten America is now just ashes recorded by satellites. All content above is for simulated, hypothetical, strategic, and analytical purposes only. It is not intended to incite violence, political bias, or instigate military action or war. The content is purely hypothetical and analytical based on our personal assessment of potential scenarios. Any misinterpretations will not be accepted. We are not responsible for any interpretation or application of the video's content. Viewers should exercise their own judgment, verify information, and consume content selectively. Thank you so much for staying with us until the end. If you are a passionate enthusiast who enjoys military analysis and hypothetical scenarios, please stay with our channel. If you found this video interesting, please like and subscribe so you don't miss any daily updates from us. Now, you can watch some of our latest and most popular videos currently displayed on the screen. Goodbye, and see you in the next video.